Hi everyone, my name is Indradeep, and as part of our web series, I'm here to talk to you about some of the different career pathways that you have available to yourself right after an MBA. I often get asked this question, which one is a more achievable pathway, which one is a more realistic pathway. My experience, it's always been, it depends. As you do your MBA, you'll see that that's going to be a very classic response to most of the questions. It depends, and honestly, it does. So I'm not here to actually tell you which pathway is more relevant to you. I would need to have a lot more information for me to be able to come up with an answer. But what I can do and what I want to focus on right now is to give you the information about what's different between two of the most popular pathways that people go for right after an MBA. Not necessarily through their essays, absolutely through their essays, but not necessarily just that in reality. So right after you do your MBA, there's two really big opportunities in front of you. One of them is in consulting and one of them is in corporate. So what I mean by a consulting role is you go in and work for a consulting firm, and your role is to assist, as part of a team, is to assist organizations solve their business problems. And as a corporate, your role is actually to get in and implement some of the plans and absolutely formulate plans as well, but do it as part of your organization. So you're not necessarily going out and solving problem or providing advice to another organization. So with that sort of a basic top level view, I want to talk about why is it important for you to know this. Even during your MBA, you might not necessarily be exposed to this kind of information. So it's imperative for you to understand what fundamentally differs between these two career pathways, right? So in the context of an MBA application, obviously, the more you understand about these pathways, the more you know whether this is the right pathway for you. But even without the MBA application, I think it's an important and an interesting thing for you to get your head around. What is it exactly that you're looking to do right after your MBA? Some of the reasons that most MBA applicants and admissions committee keep talking about is you don't really know what your goals are. Your goals are unrealistic. You don't really need an MBA for that. It's not a practical goal. This is not something that a particular school is well known for, or recruiters coming into that school don't necessarily recruit students who want to pursue that career goal. So it is quite important for you to really nail and understand what your short-term career goal looks like. And the more you know, the more you'll understand and start beginning to appreciate whether this is something that you actually want to do. The basic difference between a consulting and a corporate role is a consulting role is that both of them require very different skill set. They are actually solving different problems, and they require you to have a certain background before your MBA and for you to have done certain things during your MBA. So it's almost like a checklist of stuff that you need to do for a consulting or a corporate role. And as part of this video chat, I'm hoping to be able to give you some of those insights. So let's get started. Let's look at consulting. What sort of consulting firms are there? There's obviously the big three, the McKinsey, which is more around your strategy, CEO, board level, corporate governance, helping organizations formulate not only their corporate strategy, which means where the organization is going in the next 3 to 5 years, but also a business unit strategy, which means if it's a big organization having multiple products, then you could have a product strategy for that particular business unit within that overall corporate umbrella. So McKinsey is an organization that works really strongly in that strategy, irrespective of the geography it's working on. BCG, which is Boston Consulting Group, focuses a lot on consumer and marketing. It varies a lot by state within the US as well as within geographies, but that's what they are really well known for. Bain, on the other hand, are a lot more on the finance part of the mergers and acquisitions, divestments, preparing organizations for IPO, doing due diligence. So as you can understand, because of these three different focuses, these kind of organizations look for different skill set within individuals. After the big three, there's also the other sort of larger consulting companies which focus more on the strategy. There's LEK Consulting, there's Booz, which is part of Strategy Ant now. Feel free to go in and do a bit of research if you've never really heard of these organizations, just to get a better sense of what we're looking for, but this will give you a broad understanding. There's also the big four accounting firms and the multidisciplinary firms, so organizations like Deloitte, KPMG, EY, PwC, Accenture, they all do that kind of management consulting. Then you have boutique consulting firms, which by that I mean there's typically anywhere between 10 to 25, 30 consultants and partners who work within an organization that is very much focused in a particular city or a geography, could be a state or could be an industry, but they're not really international. Like all of these companies I mentioned, as I'm sure you're aware, that they've got more than 2,000, 3,000 people working for them, some of them in the excess of 150, 200, 300,000 people. However, these kind of boutique consulting firms are much smaller. They have a niche. They work in that region. It's a good opportunity for you if you're struggling to get into the larger ones. But just bear in mind that comes with its own sort of restrictions. And as part of another video, I'll talk to you about case studies and challenges that come up in consulting, just so that you're a bit more aware of what to expect during consulting. HR consulting is another big area where you've got large organizations like Aon, Hay, Mercer, again, lots of boutique companies, and even the big four consulting firms play in that HR consulting. Now, given that, and I'm sure you understand what a corporate role means, it's a role working for a large multinational organization like an Apple or a Facebook or a Dell or a bank or Coca-Cola or a consumer company or a mining company. So these are all companies, and you could get a role within that. But if I could just talk to you about fundamentally what I think to be four key differences, there are quite a few, but the four key differences. Let's look at the pathway, right? So for a corporate role, you typically get in with your past experience that you've got before your MBA, and then using your MBA, you get into sort of a manager level role. So what that means is you've done some sort of a role within marketing or finance, and then you go out and do an MBA, you were an analyst or a manager, and then you move into a senior manager, like typically 2 levels above where you were doing, but also in a larger organization. That's the pathway, that one of the pathways that you can take. The other common pathway is you'd go out and do consulting for 2 to 3 years, and then you do an MBA, you do an MBA and then you go out and do consulting for 2 to 3 years, and that's where you go into more sort of the general manager level, which is one level below the head of the group executive or the head of that particular business unit. In consulting, typically, unless you've got prior consulting background, you're looking at entering at an associate or a consultant level. Now, I'll talk to you a little bit more about what these different levels are, but as of now, an associate or a consultant your role is going to be analyzing, sometimes a little bit of leadership of a team, getting your hypothesis together and preparing presentations, but you don't necessarily own the relationship with the client. That's typically 1 or 2 levels above you, depending on the complexity of the client and the nature of your consulting firm. Obviously, with a smaller firm, you get a bit more exposure, but the clientele might not necessarily be that big or that large, which you typically want to get early on in your career. Nature of work is another big difference. In consulting, your focus is on working across multiple projects, across multiple teams, time-bound, analytical, problem-solving, report writing, whereas in a corporate, the focus is predominantly on your accountability and decision-making. The higher you go in the organization, there's very little time given to you for your training. The detailed and the breadth of work is quite significant, even within a function. Whereas in consulting, after a couple of years, you start specializing into your own area. But as I said, accountability, decision making, if you're not really comfortable with that, you are going to be struggling quite a bit because the impacts are quite big. So even if you go out and get consulting advice, you would still be required to come up with your own decisions. And how you do that is, there's obviously a lot to that, but you've got to be comfortable with that. In terms of salary, most of the corporate roles, like for like, you're probably paid a little bit more. Again, just my experience, I'm not saying this is the norm, but you're typically paid slightly more in a corporate role. When you enter in a corporate role, your salary might be slightly lower than the opportunity you get in a consulting, fixed salary. As you keep going in a corporate role, your salary starts not diversifying, but starts getting broader, and you start earning a lot more money. What that basically means is that that's the reason why people from consulting would move into a pretty senior role within a corporate. So that's the difference. In terms of the challenges, the bureaucratic managing really senior stakeholders, we keep hearing about office politics, and that's actually true. That's a big part. If relationships sour, it's really hard to work through that because you're kind of stuck with your team. Whereas the expectation to perform is there from day one, right? So there's very little time for you to learn. Whereas in consulting, it's a bit more relaxed. There is pressure. The quality of the client work is exceptionally hard. And again, I intend to show you some of those. What do I mean by quality of work, and what exactly does a consultant do? I mean, why is it so hard for a non-consulting background person to move into consulting? And I'll give you with some nice case studies. But the stakeholder management and all, typically there's someone else doing it. You go in, do some work, and then move on to the next project. Don't really like your team. That's not really a big problem because you can obviously be part of another team, but the level of quality in your work, the attention to detail, numeracy skill, presentation skills, stakeholder management, exceptionally important. All right, let's have a quick look at what a consulting ladder looks like. So you typically have your junior analysts who could also be business analysts. Then you have your associate or consultants who are typically your MBA level entry. And after that, you could have a senior associate or consultant. Some companies have consultants and senior associate. You have a consultant below and a senior and an associate as you keep progressing. Typically after that, you have a team manager. Then you have a senior manager. You could then have a principal consultant who is considered to be like managing a couple of teams. They are the main sort of client managers, relationship managers. Some companies also have the managers managing those relationships, but it's typically principal or manager. Some organizations might have an associate director, consulting firms. Then you have a director or maybe a practice leader, and then you have a partner, senior partner. Typically a very sort of stock standard level. In terms of career progression, it takes about 2 to 3 years between each of these levels that I mentioned. So you're looking at post-MBA investing in about anywhere between 6 to 8 years to become a senior principal or a partner, which is where if you want to stay in consulting, that's where you want to go. Which is why a lot of students put down becoming a partner as a long-term goal and getting in as an associate to learn the trade. As you work through this from an associate to a manager, you start picking up niches. So you either become a function expert or you become an industry expert. So you could be like an aviation expert or a mining expert, or you could be like a function expert as in strategy expert or operations expert, or HR expert or finance expert. In a corporate ladder, it's kind of a similar thing. You've got a specialist, which is like your numbers person who is really good, who helps preparing reports. Then you have senior specialist, which is the level kind of you enter, or an MBA or a manager. After an MBA, you either enter into senior specialist or manager. Then you move on into a senior manager, and that's when different countries have different nomenclatures. But typically, after a senior manager, you move into a head off level, which is about 3 to 4 years of experience, depending on what kind of if you're moving in from consulting. If it is a really top tier consulting firm, then you can fast track that. If not, if it's a boutique consulting firm, then you probably need to work for about 4 to 5 years before you can move into this level. And then at the head off level, which is 2 levels below from the group executive of that particular division or function or business unit, no matter how you want to call it. And then after that, you have a general manager, then you have a group executive, and the group executive typically reports to the group CEO. So that's how normally a corporate ladder looks like. In terms of two of the big questions, popularity and feasibility. Like, are these sort of career pathways really popular in the school, and is it feasible for someone with my background? Those are the kind of things you're trying to understand from a career pathway perspective, right? So what you need to understand is, first have a look at, do your LinkedIn research, right? So as part of the LinkedIn research, what you need to do is work out, do people with your background, what are they doing in that MBA school, in that business school, post the graduation, right? So we're looking at someone with 2 to 3 years after the graduation, and we're looking at people with maybe 7 to 10 years after the graduation. And that'll give you a good sense of whether your short-term and long-term career goals are actually popular. Is that, do you have a lot of people doing it? And what I mean by profiling yourself with respect to the school is, have a look at your education, your work experience, your nationality, or sort of cultural background, right? So, or your gender. And once you look at all of that, try to come up with at least 2 or 3 of those 3 or 4 character traits and find out how many of those similar people, right? So as an example, if you're an Indian IT male, then look at Indian IT male within that business school who graduated for 2 to 3 years back and who graduated 7 to 10 years back, and see typically what are they doing now. If you have a lot of people doing that, then you know it's a very popular pathway. I would highly recommend going in and getting a LinkedIn premium account. I think it's now free for a month, but that really helps you understand and do a lot more research using a lot more filtering, which you would need. In terms of the next step, which is practicality or feasibility, you're doing the same research as before, but what you're trying to understand is what seems to be the issue, if there is any, for people to pursue that career pathway, right? A lot of the times it is very helpful to go in and talk to alumni, preferably with similar sort of background, and asking them the question up front. You know, like 2 questions. How would this particular student help a student like myself? How would this particular school help a student like myself achieve this career pathway, right? That answer is golden. And they'll give you lots of insights about what happens at the school, the associations, the clubs, the events, the frequency of certain companies coming in, the truth, which is really hard to gauge through forums and through websites. This is a fantastic opportunity for you to get that answer, which will help you write why this particular school, as I described in one of my earlier videos, but also ask them, do you see challenges with this? Like, for example, a marketing role. Do I need to be of a particular cultural and national background to get into a marketing role? As you can understand, a marketing role requires a lot of stakeholder management. So does every other role, to be frank, but marketing role requires that over a longer period of time. And if you really know what you're talking about and you've been part of that culture, it's a lot easier to gel, and which is why a marketing role typically requires, it's harder for someone without that background to get in there. Finance role, if you don't have a finance background, you're probably going to be doing sales or business development, similar to an IT role. If you don't really have an IT, but you want to get into a tech company, you're probably going to be doing sales marketing. If you have kind of an engineering tech background, it might be easier to move into product management. But these are the 2 kind of popular roles within a tech company. Same within a finance company. Unless you've got pre-MBA finance background, you're probably looking at just a sales or a business development role. But hopefully what this video does is give you a little bit of sense on in the differences between what a consulting and a corporate role is, and a little bit more to think about when you select your career pathways, and how do you make that career pathway seem to be feasible and practical, not only for yourself but also to convince to the MBA admissions committee. If you like the video, I would love to hear back from you and get a little bit more insight about whether this is the kind of information you're looking for. Please like, comment, and share my video. Subscribe to my channel. They're all down here in the description link. I would love to hear back from you. Best of luck, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you.